It's good to be back. Well, finally, you're joining me back down at my Syndicate once again, and it has been ages since the last time I was down here. The first video of Syndicate Diaries was uploaded over 3 months ago, and that was a new venture. I was getting my teeth sunk into a new place, but life and work and everything that's happened between then and now has got in the way of me being able to get back down here and put any kind of time in. I've done one session since the last video, on here, and that resulted in a tench, I believe it was, and that was a good 2.5 months ago, I think. So it's been a very, very long time. We'll do a bit of a recap on everything that's gone on between then and now, but first of all, bring you up to speed with this session. So as always, when I get here, I do a lap of the lake just to see if there's anyone on to start with, if there's any good signs of fish anywhere, and there wasn't a lot to go on, to be honest. The wind at the time was pushing from the top end all the way down to the bottom, so my first thought was probably going to head down that way. On the walk round, there was one angler on, and they were right down in that corner. They just set up, so they beat me to it, and they had the same idea, thinking that with the wind pushing down there, odds are the fish may have followed it. However, having a walk around, I did see the odd fizzer here and there, but nothing much to say you've got to stop here. So I didn't really have much else to go on, and I didn't want to go opposite him. Just fishing etiquette, the way the Syndicate's set up is that if you fish opposite and there's no one else on, you're kind of being a bit of a knob. So I didn't want to do that. And I've ended up rocking up pretty much halfway between one end of the lake to the other, maybe a bit closer to where the wind's been pushing. And the swim that I'm in dominates quite a good amount of water. So I've got an island to the right, island to the left, and I've got the channel directly in front of me. And then obviously I've got open water to the left and to the right. So I like the look of this swim. It's quite open. Quite a lot of the swims here can feel quite closed in, but here shows a lot of the water, which is one of the things I quite liked about the look of it. And where the wind was pushing down, it was sort of swinging round into this channel. It was a bit more choppy, so I thought if they're following the wind, odds are they're going to come down through this way and may go through this channel at some point, and likely, well, hopefully, I pick something off as they move through here. So I'd settled on this swim, and it was now a case of finding where I'm actually going to fish for the next, not even 24 hours. I got to be off by probably about 8 AM tomorrow morning, and I got here about 11 AM this morning. It's now, I think, about 6:30ish in the evening, which is when I'm doing the recap. So to start with, I want to be as quick and efficient as possible. Find spots, get rigs out and bait all in one as quick as possible. Now, I know in the last video I used my bushwhacker, but since then I've done a few trips on various places where I've used a bait boat and a deeper, and I can just see the benefits of it. So I know people always feel the need to justify the usage of a bait boat, but in this instance, when I've got less than 24 hours ahead of me, I want to do everything as quick as possible, as silent as possible, and get the rods out. So that's what you're about to see. Now for this session, I'm deciding to use a bait boat because my first session I used the bushwhacker. It's great, it delivered the bait how I wanted it in a nice discreet way, but sometimes when the wind picks up like it is today, it can be a bit of a faff. And at the end of the day, it's giving you the same bait delivery as a bait boat does, only a bait boat is pretty much a lot quicker. But also I'm using the bait boat right now with the deeper attached to the back of it just to check the areas in front of me, because this is my third session. I still know next to nothing about this place. So I want to find if there is anything blatantly obvious as a spot to fish. So I've just driven the bait boat initially over to the island on my left, and it's like a channel in front of me. I'm just checking right close to the reeds, and even right up next to the reeds where you might think it might be starting to get a bit shallower, it's still 5 foot in depth and a pretty solid bottom. I'm noticing it's getting that sort of yellow to white reflection on the lake bed with a small layer of silt, which is pretty much what I'd expect. I'm just looking for any obvious harder spots, or maybe a deep hole that the carp have bored out. So I'll just bring it back towards me now just to see if there's anything on the point of this as it comes round. We're down to 6 foot there, so it's a little bit deeper on the very point. If I come around a bit more, 6.2, 6.6, I'm going to go around to the front face of the island, 6'6", but the lake bed itself is pretty much exactly the same. So I'm not surprised on what the actual makeup of the lake bed is, but what I'm just looking for is any really obvious depth changes, and to be honest, there isn't any. So here is where I want to put one, because I think it's a bit of a likely ground. I've just crashed the bait boat into the island. It's quite a likely spot that the fish are going to patrol around. With the wind pushing like it is, if they're coming from top to bottom, they may get to this bit in front of me and decide to come round the islands. And there's a little bit of shelter from the wind where I'm taking the bait boat now, which I'm feeling like I might put a bait. So about where I've got the bait boat now, it's 6 foot in depth, or 5.6. So 5.5 foot, and it looks like a pretty solid bottom. So I think it's likely to put one there. I'm just going to take it across to the other side. So around to 6.2, there's a bit of weed here. Just come this way ever so slightly to more onto the actual bit where it curves round to the opening of the lake. It cleans up, and that bottom looks pretty solid. A little bit of low-lying silt, which is what I'd expect, and the way I'm going to be fishing from the boat, that is not a problem at all. It's going down to about 7 foot right on the corner of that island. So deeper than I expected actually, but that's given me all the information I need. It's going to be one there. Just going to look where I want to put the third and final rod. So it's a fairly consistent 7 foot between me and the island, so it's quite deep, deeper than I thought. I thought it was around the 5 foot mark, so deeper than I expected. Okay, so from about 5 minutes of driving around, I ended up at one pretty much where I was planning on putting them anyway, but I just checked the bottom. One on the left part of the channel, one on the right part of the channel, right on the point as it comes round. And the third rod, I'm just going to put in mid-water between the bank and the island, where it's down to 7.5 foot. It's the deepest part of the channel, and it goes up from, well, it's from 7.5 and it goes up to about 6 either side. So it's only a 1.5 foot deviation, but it is still the deepest point. So I'm just going to try that, see if that brings a bite. Let's bring the boat back, load up the hoppers and get the rigs out. So in next to no time I had all 3 rods out in position with a good amount of bait on top of them. Now the left hand rod, which was down to the very left, I filled that left hopper really full of bait. So well over, I'd say probably a kilo or so of bait on one. Sounds like quite a lot, but it's really stinking. I'll get onto the mix in a second. The other 2 were slightly less in the hopper, but then I did 2 separate trips, or 1 separate trip for each rod with both hoppers full of bait, and opened the hoppers as it's kind of on the move. So there's quite a good amount of bait over the middle and right hand rod, and hopefully that draws some fish in. It's an easy way of getting probably a good 2 kilos of bait over one rod in next to no time without thrashing it to a foam with a spom on that. So I may have overdone it with the bait, but I'd like to think with the mix that I've got, it's not too much, and I'll run through that now. This absolutely stinks. Now this is the mix I'm going to be using on this trip. It's very similar to a mix I've been using recently to great success on other trips. And I think that's down to the fact that there's lots of different scents and smells going on in there, as well as different size food items. Because if you put this into the context of human terms, I know you probably shouldn't do that with carp, but if you look at a spread of food on a table at a buffet, not everyone's going to eat the same thing. Some people are going to have the pork pies and sausage rolls. Other idiots are going to have just the salad. But you know what I mean, sometimes you want something else depending on how you're fancying or what you're thinking. So if there's a mixture of different things in here, I like to think that sometimes a carp might come along and fancy a really fishy bait, sometimes it might come along and fancy something a bit sweeter or something small, something big. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it, but having lots of different items in here, different food size items, scents and smells, I think it's going to cater for all manners of fish depending on what they're fancying. So breaking this mix down into more detail, I start off with a base of boilies only, and that's the Isofish in various different sizes. I think this is 18mm and some 15s. Some of that's crumbed up as well. And I've also got some 12s and 15mm celt in there, again some crumbed up as well. So I've got a really fishy bait and quite a sweet bait, and one of them's dark in colour, one of them is pale in the colour. On top of that, I've also chucked in a few tiger nuts, and I've also got some response pellets in there, and the smallest items I've got is actually the high impact ground bait. So I've got a powder form of a bait in here as well. So I've got from big 80mm all the way down to a powder, so there's something that's going up all different food columns, all up and down the water column, sorry. When the fish start feeding, hopefully that disperses quite well, and there's loads of scents and smells coming from the small items all the way up to the bigger items. To bring all this together and make it stink to high heaven like it does, I've chucked in a load of the stick mixes, or equivalent stick mix, or matching stick mixes for the celt and Isofish. I did all that yesterday, so that's completely soaked in now. This is really, really stinky. That pellet's just starting to go soft, and all of that ground bait which I put in as well has clung to some of those baits, so they all just look really, really tasty. Although the smell is an odd one because there's a bit of sweetness in there, but I'm mainly getting a fishy smell from that. Now lastly, what I'm going to do now, rather than putting this on yesterday, because I don't really want this to sink in as much, soak in as much, is some of the smart liquid. This is the cell one, so it's going to give it much more of a sweeter scent to it, but this should go on the outside of the baits, and when it hits the water, it starts to break down and disperse out into the water column, hopefully getting a bigger reach of scent from this. Rather than it soaking in, it goes out into the water straight away. So this is going to get added now, and once that's on, it's ready to go into the bait boat and start putting the rigs out. And that brings us to now. It's just gone 6 o'clock and it's glorious sunshine actually. I'm getting really warm sat here in my hoodie. Even as I started filming, it was overcast. The sun's decided to pop out, and that's given a false impression of the weather today really, because it's been pretty disgusting. I got here and it was drizzly, bit horrible, overcast but not too bad. Got the bivvy up and then it just started raining harder. And then by the time I got the rods out, the heavens just opened for about half an hour to an hour. Got everything soaked. I've only got my mozzie mesh front on here because the mozzies can be pretty ruthless on the Somerset levels this time of year. And the rain was just driving through that, and it was almost hitting the mesh and then dispersing, like it was coming through just like a sieve. So then I was still getting mist spray everything inside. But everything's relatively dry now. I think that's the end of the rain, and I can just sit back and chill for the rest of the evening, which is exactly what I love about the Syndicate Diary series that I do. I don't go over the top of the filming. It's just me chatting to a camera, running through my methods, and then I can just relax. And it's a bit different this one because for the last 7 odd years, as you know, I was working for Carpology magazine, and as much as I enjoyed that, every session had this back of my mind of, oh, I've got work I need to be doing while I'm here. So it's nice that now, although yes, this is now my job, it's a bit different because I'm doing it for myself, and there's not that stress and strain of thinking, oh, I've got to get this done for someone else, because all of what I'm doing now is for myself. So I can properly relax this evening, hopefully get a good night's sleep. With my little one at home at the moment, she's been waking us up normally about 5:30 in the morning. I'm looking forward to getting a good night's sleep, and also just chilling out this evening and watching a bit of YouTube at Netflix, or even reading a bit as well. And that leads us nicely onto the sponsor of today's video, which is Readle. And if you haven't heard of them before, they are an app which you can have on your phone, any device really, and it contains over 7,500 different magazines and newspapers at the touch of a button basically. And as you know, having worked for 7 odd years for a magazine myself, I have stacks and stacks of magazines back at home, but it's not exactly easy to bring them all fishing with me. So if I want to read one specific article from a magazine that was 2.5 years ago, I'd have to bring them all with me and find that one article. Don't have to do that anymore. All I have to do is bring my phone along with me, open up the app, find the magazine I want to read, and in this case Carpology, find the article I want to watch, because it's all backdated, and then I can read it on there. So whether it's an inspirational one that I want to read or how to tie up a certain rig, I can find it all on there. But of course, as you know, I'm not just into my fishing, believe it or not. I've got some other hobbies as well, massively into my camera work. So if I wanted to find anything about photography or videography, all I've got to do is go into the Explore tab, search a keyword, and it will come up with loads of magazines or things that it thinks are relevant to that topic, and I can start reading from there. So it's as simple as that. And what I really like about Readle as well is that it's obviously space saving. I don't have to bring loads of magazines with me, so it's a bit more eco-friendly as well, because I'm not having to bring loads of stuff with me, which stripping back when you go fishing is obviously one of the key things. But also offline mode, that is an absolute game changer, because how many times have you gone fishing and you've gone to a venue and you're looking forward to having a bit of peace later on? Yes, some of you will think you should watch the water non-stop. Some of us like to look on our phones and devices, and if you've got no signal, it's really, really frustrating. So you can download things whilst you're oh, excuse me, was that a fly? Not sure. So anyway, all you need to do is pre-download what you want to read whilst you're on the bank, when you're at home or when you have signal. So when you're in an environment where your signal is rubbish, you can still access Readle and read everything you want to. So if Readle sounds interesting to you, all you got to do is download it. Click the link in the description below and you get 2 months free straight away. And remember, if you don't like it, you can opt out at any point. There is no obligation to stay on there, but I'm sure once you've given it a try, you'll enjoy it. So big thanks once again to Readle for sponsoring this video. So I've already shown you the bait mix that I'm using on each of the rods, but what about the actual rigs and hook bait and the lead arrangement and everything that I'm using? Well, not much has changed since the first Syndicate session on here a few months ago, but I have changed the hook bait size and how I'm actually presenting it with this little PVA bag. So rig wise, it's kept really, really simple. I'm just using a 20-pound semi-stiff material. And what I do with that, and I make it probably, so the end result is probably around the 8-inch mark. So I take about 12 inches of line or something like that, and then I strip back. The perfect amount to strip back for the hair for me is the length of my middle finger plus about 1 inch or so. So I pinch 1 inch of line below my finger, stretch to the end, and that's normally the perfect amount I need to strip back. Of course, that's going to change for different people, but my middle finger is this big. I've probably just blurred that out so I don't get demonetized. So once I've stripped that bit back, I tie a little loop in the end for my hair and attach the hook bait. And as I said, I'm using these little quads. They're probably around the 10 to 12 mil mark, so, but they're a different shape to a round boilie, of course. They're more square or pillow shaped. So once that's on, I then slide on a tiny little bit of shrink tube, which is what I use to trap the hair on the rig, followed by the hook, which on here is a barbless, and then I tie that on knotless, knot style. Pull the line through, so there's just a tiny bit of the strip back section left exposed from the eye, and then using my nail I pinch that little bit of coating which is still there and just tease it back probably an inch or so. And what that does is it puckers up the coating, and that's perfect for later on when I add the putty, something for the putty to grip onto and hold it in position. So once that's pulled back and teased back, I add a little bit more tubing onto the eye, and that's going to form the kicker once I shrink that all down. And then just tie a figure-8 loop knot in the top, which I can then add a anti-tangle sleeve. So once that's steamed down, you'll find that the little bit on the shank of the hook grips the hair. It's quite good for showing you if you've had an aborted take, because that hook bait normally flies back and that tubing slides. You can see if you've had an aborted take, if something's happened. But also it just means when the fish blows that hook bait out, the hook bait moves further before the hook does. There's more potential to hook the fish. The kicker just helps make the hook turn a bit more aggressively. And then the little bit of putty just gives a little bit more weight and helps to pull that little section down towards the hook end as it's coming out of the fish's mouth. So if you do the palm test, which I know, take it with a pinch of salt, obviously a hook bait is going to be lifted up, your lead's on the bottom, the weight is going to be pulling back down. So as you pull the rig around your hand, and that little bit of putty, whether it makes a huge amount of difference, I don't know, but it gives it a bit of a pivot point, and that stripped back bit of coating gives loads of movement for the hook. So it's just a little bit of a hinge, it just gives a bit more movement of the hook bait in the mouth, and I think that just gives it really good hooking potential. And so far this has done me really well lately, and that just goes to my go-to lead arrangement, which is a semi-fixed lead clip system. So the lead clip can come off, so if I get any kind of issues, that lead can come off the lead clip. The tubing comes out of the tail rubber, and the lead clip itself comes off the swivel. So the most safe method, I think, of possible fishing. So if you had a crack off, all of that is going to come off, which is really, really handy. But also the semi-fixed setup of the lead clip means that when the fish hooks itself, you get that initial bolt effect, swivel pops out, and then it's free running. So there's no pivot point for the fish to discharge the hook from or use that as some kind of anchor to work from, because fish can get quite clever, and you'll find the bites are a bit finicky to start with. You can tell they're shaking their heads on the spot, and then they tend to bolt off for it. Other than that, not much has changed. I tend to fish a pretty tight clutch. I'm not one of those that has a really loose clutch to get stripping takes if I can avoid it. Obviously it looks good on Instagram if you can every now and then, but I find that having it fairly tight means that by the time I've got to the rod, it's almost like you're already playing the fish, because it's got the stretch in the mono, the bit of bend in the rod is already playing that fish for you, especially on a barbless venue. It means that there's already pressure, and you need pressure on that hook hold to hopefully avoid losing a fish. I think that's the whole setup, and all I need now is for fish to show up and prove that all of what I've just discussed has done the trick. Time will tell. But it's a lovely evening. I'm going to enjoy cooking up some food now. As I said, kicking back, relaxing, reading some bits, watching some things, and just enjoying the fact that I'm on my Syndicate, the rods are out, I'm filming for myself, and life is good. If this was a podcast, I could have got away with telling you I'm eating something absolutely incredibly looking. Honey and mustard sausages on a bed of buttery, creamy mash and fresh garden peas. Where in actual fact, you can see what I'm eating, and it looks like forgotten barbecue sausages on top of school canteen smush. Oh, and onion gravy. I can add, it's not much better than what it looks. But I'm still enjoying myself. Unfortunately, a very quiet night. I was quite hopeful going into tonight, of course, but I didn't really hear much. The odd fish I did hear going to sleep were further up that end, which I wouldn't have thought of after the wind had been pushing that way. And then I woke up a couple times through the night, not because I had any beeps or anything, but because the little bit of food I spilt last night when making my mashed potato mush, I spilt some, and 2 hedgehogs came a couple of times to start munching on it, and I didn't realise just how noisy hedgehogs are when they eat, especially when they're only 4 foot from your head. So that kept me up a couple of times, and then before I knew it, it was getting light, my body was waking me up anyway, and no fish to recall. So I've had my breakfast, I'm just finishing off my coffee. I just checked the time thinking, oh, I've got ages till I've got to go. I need to be in the car park and leaving in about 40 minutes maximum. So I'm going to finish this coffee and start packing down. Lovely to be out. As I said, this has been my Syndicate diaries, are when I properly get to relax and just think, enjoy fishing in its more raw format without worrying about camera stuff and all that. Having said that, I have filmed a second video whilst being here for my channel, which was all about night fishing, the things that I wish I knew about going into night fishing when I was younger that I know now, if that makes sense. And it's some of the tips and tricks I got from you guys on Instagram as well. So that video will be going live at some point in the future as well. And hopefully it helps out people going into their first ever night, or if they've done night fishing for a bit, there's hopefully some tips and tricks in there that make it a bit easier for you guys in the future. But I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Like I said, I do have to start bringing the rods in now and packing down, heading home. Fridays are swimming days with my daughter, so I look forward to them just as much as I did getting the rods out earlier. Hope you've enjoyed Syndicate Diaries number 2. I know there's no fish and there's lots of talking, lots of waffling, but you guys seem to enjoy them. They're a bit more of a slower paced video, shall we say. Anyway, I'm waffling. I'm going to say the same things over and over and make myself late. Cheers for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Salt of using it in old boiled water. You still there?